Hi, and welcome to the Crash Course in Purim. Purim is the holiday when we celebrate the second time in Jewish history the Jewish people were redeemed from exile. But the redemption from Persia could not have been more different than the redemption from Egypt. In Egypt, we experienced open miracles. There were the 10 plagues in Egypt, the splitting of the Red Sea. In Persia, not one open miracle. In Egypt, we were suffering through a long slavery. In Persia, it was going to be a surprise attack of mass genocide. And in Egypt, the constant refrain was, "Let my people go." We always knew we were God's people. In Persia, we kept asking whether we were God's people anymore. Just imagine what it felt like to be a Jew in Persia at that time. We were living in exile for the first time after being in the land of Israel for 850 years. Our holy temple, which was built by King Solomon, was destroyed by the Babylonians and it lay in ruins. And the gift of prophecy, which enabled the great ones amongst us to communicate directly with God, was over. No more open communication. No land, no prophecy, no temple. And then to make things worse, the prophet Jeremiah had said we would be in exile for only 70 years. Persia conquers Babylon, the 70 years seemingly pass, and we're still not redeemed. Could things get any worse? But they do, and this is where the story in Megillat Esther picks up. To rub it in, the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, wants to celebrate the fact that the 7 years have passed and the Jews have not been redeemed by making a huge 180-day banquet, and he invites all the nations in his kingdom to come, including the Jews. And the Jewish people go because they figure they have to just accept this new reality. And then he even comes wearing the Jewish high priest's garments, and he uses temple vessels to serve wine to all his guests. Can you imagine how humiliating it was? Now God seemingly does nothing about this. And then another 9 years pass, the king promotes his evil advisor Haman to a position of great power. And Haman is so arrogant, he demands that everybody bow down to him. And they do, except for one man, the Jewish people's leader, Mordecai. Now Haman gets so incensed, he goes to the king. But because he happens to come from a Jew-hating nation called Amalek, instead of condemning Mordecai, he convinces the king that the entire Jewish people represent a threat to the kingdom and they must be destroyed. And he gets the king to sign a decree of mass genocide against the Jewish people. Now, can you imagine being a Jew back then? Would you have an ounce of hope that we could defend ourselves against 127 nations? Would you have been convinced that God must have given up on the Jewish people, that our special relationship is over? 100%. Now what if I told you, don't worry, the Queen of Persia, she's Jewish. She's going to come save the day. And the Jews with their enemies, yeah, we'll be victorious in battle. And what about Haman? Well, in a year from now, Mordecai is going to replace Haman as Viceroy of Persia, and Haman's going to get hung on gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. And in terms of Jeremiah's prophecy, the Jewish people are going to be granted permission in a few years from now to go back and rebuild the temple exactly 70 years after its destruction. But that's exactly what happened. It was an amazing turnaround. And when the Jewish people traced God's hand through these events, they realized it was all the way back there at that initial banquet. You see, at the very end of that banquet, the king got so drunk, he asked his queen Vashti to appear before his guests immodestly. She refuses and gets executed. So the king does a search for a new queen, and he ends up selecting Esther, a beautiful Jewish girl. Now, Esther was an orphan, and she was being raised by her uncle Mordecai. And Mordecai told her not to reveal your identity as a Jew. And she doesn't. It's only years later, when the decree against the Jews surfaces, that Mordecai tells her, perhaps this is the reason you were selected to be queen. Now is your moment. Go in, reveal your identity, and save your people. And she does. And that's when the hidden miracle of Purim was revealed. So how do we celebrate on Purim? Well, actually, before Purim, we have a fast day. It's called the Fast of Esther. It's a half-day fast. It goes from the morning until the evening, and that's to commemorate the fasting the Jews did before going to battle against their enemies. Then on Purim, it's a mitzvah to hear the Megillah read once in the evening and once during the day to publicize the miracle. And I want to point out, nowhere in the Megillah is God's name actually mentioned because of the hidden nature of the miracle. Now on Purim Day, we do things to foster Jewish unity. And that's because Haman had said the Jewish people are a scattered, dispersed nation. So one thing we do is we give a gift of 2 foods to a friend. It's called Shalach Manot. And we also give charity to at least 2 poor people to make sure their needs are met on Purim Day. And people often give money to the local synagogue to make sure the monies are distributed. On Purim Day, it's a mitzvah to have a big festive meal and serve wine because we were saved from physical destruction. And also to recall the fact that it was at a banquet where wine was being served that the miracle happened. And finally, we dress up in costume to remind ourselves that yes, reality is masked, and behind that mask is a loving, caring God. Before we conclude, I just want to close with one thought. Why is the holiday called Purim? Well, Purim is actually a Persian word for lottery, because Haman had used a lottery to determine which month and which day to wipe out the Jewish people on. Because Haman believed that God's relationship to the Jewish people was coincidental. It was as cold as the throw of the die. And our Purim message to Haman and to all the enemies of the Jewish people is, if they want to try their hand against the Almighty's, they don't stand a chance. Have a really happy Purim, and may we all merit to see and feel God's guiding hand in our own lives.